Welcome back. I'm Mary Claire, and welcome to Peak, the official Grow Sport podcast. Today, we're going to continue our series on Dr. Brian Ritchie's new book, The Culture Code. And we've covered in the introduction, chapter 1, chapter 2. We're going to dive into chapter 3 and start to get into the nuts and bolts of how to actually create a culture of peak performance. So we're going to dive into the sport methodology and do an overview today and talk about how the power of process is actually incredibly critical to driving peak performance culture. So Brian, welcome back. Okay. All right. So, Brian, you opened the chapter by saying that great leadership isn't about who the leader is, about their charisma, about their personality so much, but it's more about what the leader does. So, why is that distinction so important? And what do leaders actually do that create culture? Let's dive into that a little bit more.
Yeah. So remember, again, culture are the rules of the game. And so people look to the leader. The leader has a very often they don't understand the power they have in terms of people watching them and what they do and how that mirrors what they do. In fact, there's a great saying that says that if you want to know what the organization looks like, just look to the leader, because it'll get expressed throughout the entire organization. Here's the challenge. A lot of times we think that great leadership is a personal trait or quality. And we say things like, oh, that person is a natural leader, or that person is born as a leader. And it turns out that what we're really saying is that person is a charismatic, desirable person to be around for might be many different reasons. But the challenge is that if we follow the leader because of who they are, not because of what they are or what they do, then we get into this culture where people are playing politics. It's all about getting face time with the leader. It's all about being seen by the leader. It's not about actual results. It's more about these other softer things that actually are not leading to outcomes that matter to the organization.
You know, it reminds me of, and I should have looked up the book. Had I known, I would have looked up the book. But there was a chapter, and it's a very popular business book. It was a chapter about this guy kind of hiring a charismatic sales leader, ended up firing him, and brought in, I think from externally, an individual who was you wouldn't even dream he was a salesperson.
Right.
But he knew how to build a performance culture, and it was about accountability and enabling, and there was in caring, and there was all sorts of elements to it. But he wouldn't be your first pick for somebody you think of as a leader, but it's because, and we'll get into this, but the process that he ran and how he held people accountable, which created culture, which actually made people feel like he cared, which then drove performance and so on and so forth. So he was not one of these charismatic folks, but who knew how to create a culture around process.
We're actually making a very strong argument, Mary Claire, that you should never hire on personality. You should hire on process. And let's just unpack that for a second, because if I have a process that's transparent, everybody knows how it works, how it operates, who does what, where they do it, when they do it, who's participating and contributing, I eliminate all that political back office bullcrap.
Yeah.
Right? That's like, oh, I'm going to take credit for what so-and-so did, or, oh, I'm going to try to position myself politically and say all the right things to the boss at all the right times. And we get into these environments where the people actually doing the work aren't being recognized for the work. The people that aren't doing work are being recognized as doing the work. We create this culture that's toxic in its interrelationships because we lack process and transparency.
Which is actually a great segue into my next question, because you're really direct in saying that no change happens without a process, period. That's something we say to our clients all the time. So for any leaders listening, what does it look like when a company is operating without process? So it's what you were kind of you were getting at. And then what happens the moment that process shows up? So let's talk about that kind of dichotomy.
Yeah, we should, and maybe we can even be a little bit clearer when we say that you can do change. You can tell everyone you're going to change something, and you can even start down that path. But what happens is you get into this whipsaw back and forth of new things tried, nothing works. Let's try something else. That doesn't work because you have nothing behind it to make it go. And there, you're actually creating a culture where people expect you to fail.
Yeah.
It's like,
They
oh,
wait
look,
around.
the new leader has told us to do this today. And so whenever that new leader is around, I'm going to act like I'm doing that thing. When in fact, I really have no faith in it. I don't believe it's going to happen. There's nothing behind it to suggest it will. And it has never worked in the past. So now I'm creating this vicious cycle where everyone expects it to fail. And the more they fail, the more I expect it to fail. Right. And so I've got this culture of an inability to get sustainable change or sustainable growth and scaling or development that I'm looking for.
It reminds me again of I think it was in the last chapter, chapter 1, we talked about the image of the boat. And you've got the 20% who will run through a wall, and the 20% that'll say no to everything, and the 60% that sit in the middle. The more, and I have done this as a leader, the more, before I had growth sport as a process, to be clear. But early on as a leader, throwing out these new ideas and trying something and either quitting too early because we didn't have the process to understand if it was actually working.
Right.
But then throwing another new idea, and you keep trying, and I've created that whiplash, personally.
Yeah.
Anyway, it reminds me of the boat, and I'm pretty sure I put more and more people in the middle. And that's
right.
Just waiting around to see, well, it's not worth my effort because it's going to die anyway.
Yeah. And to your point, as a leader, it's easy to throw ideas out and even to say on Monday, this is the new thing we're going to do. It's a lot harder to intentionally and purposefully put process behind those ideas about how it's going to actually happen. Who's going to do what, when, where, through what mechanism, with what partners, in what time frame. And without that clarity about who's doing what, where, when, and how, everyone's like, okay, great, new idea. What do I do? What's my part?
Yeah.
And I know that if someone's not actually spelling that out and I jump in, I know that Mary Claire's going to take the credit for this. So why even do it? Right? It's not going to help me.
You see this a lot, or I see this a lot. I feel like I often work with, either being as a member of a team or even in the work that we're doing, visionary leaders that are well-intentioned and are really trying to drive the organization forward. But without a process or a person to implement the process, it's challenging to kind of get the motor going. So
almost impossible. It really is almost impossible, because back to the comments in our last podcast, the whirlwind just dominates you. The urgent just overpowers you. And every time you're trying to get change on an idea, that is by definition an important but not urgent thing, usually.
Yeah.
Right. Now, maybe it's gotten to a point where you're like, if we don't do this, we're going to die. Okay, that happens. But it's rare. Most of the time, these are urgent, or they're not urgent, but important things.
Okay, so this is a good segue into actually you introducing the model of sport, which is a process in and of itself.
Yeah.
And it's a process to consistently deliver performance, this peak performance that we keep talking about. So in sport's an acronym: S standing for strategic alignment, P for personal performance, O for operational execution, R for results accountability, and T for team strength. So we're going to dive really deep into each of these in the coming episodes. But at a high level, kind of, why do these five pieces work together so powerfully?
Yeah. So the first one, strategic alignment, this is just simply getting your organization aligned around the strategic intent. Mm-hmm. So you think about your mission, your vision, your values, your big objectives, your strategy, your primary goals at the top of the organization, and all of your strategic goals throughout the organizations. These just all need to align. Now, when you say that, most people are going to be like, of course, but it almost is never the case when we walk into an org that those things are aligned. And that's just the first part of the process, is to get that foundation right.
So, and one thing I want to touch on, we've touched on this in other episodes, but I find it to be so critical because it's so common. What are kind of the misunderstandings when we talk about mission, vision, values, and goals and strategy? Can you name just a couple of the misunderstandings that I think create paralysis of people, or this exercise becomes lipstick rather than an actual decision-making framework? Talk to us just a few highlights here on some of those misunderstandings.
Yeah, I think that you just nailed a huge one in your introduction there, that a lot of times people feel like this is a lipstick external exercise where I need to put this so that my customers can see that I have a vision and I have a mission and we have some values here. these are actually very strong decision-making frameworks around the way you create your strategy. This should help you understand what it is you do and what it is you don't do.
Yep.
And if you don't have that and you can't get that focus from this, you've done this incorrectly.
Yeah.
So this is really about how do you set this up so that it becomes the North Star for everything else you're doing in the organization. You should be able to derive at the front line your position in the org and why you matter and what it is you're doing based on what you're looking at above you in that North Star in this foundation.
So let's say we get folks strategically aligned. We have people kind of performing at a higher level by a process by which we have people work on the things that are going to drive their personal performance, that elevates the performance of the organization. We get our SOPs in order with operational execution, which if I could like have a nice public service announcement to any organization out there, including the ones that we run, because we run into it, like getting your SOPs, your standing operating procedures in order. The three most important are such low-hanging fruit for organizations to drive performance. So that's my.
And by the way, can I just say one really quick thing on this? All of this, mission, vision, values, standard operating procedures. We say these things so many times, they're almost pejorative terms. I mean, people are like, oh my gosh, really? Standard operating procedures? Holy crud.
People roll
not
their
interested.
eyes.
Yeah, and tune out, right? Mission, vision, values, tune out. But the problem is that we've never really done them well and right in a way that informs and activates our process. If we did that, then that would feed back into a virtuous cycle. All these things become iterative in the ways that we improve them, and our organization is constantly improving and moving forward.
Well, in building on that, I feel like sometimes standard operating procedures happen. They're written because which is okay. Like there was a problem, we got to clarify it and create some. That's fine, but then it's this thing hanging out over here.
Totally.
Rather than there's a lot. The why becomes because we had a problem, not the why being because it's going to drive our performance and help all of us. And so I think that's why we get often get an eye roll with SOPs, because it's this just hanging over here. Like, how does this fit in? Cool, but we make a document. And
think about it for a second. If you got your SOPs correct, that should inform what training and what skills to hire for. Then your strategy should go back and inform your SOPs. I mean, this is a circular. Everything should be informing everything else if it's tightly aligned and helping the organization move forward.
All right, I'll get off my soapbox. So let's move to, so we got strategic alignment, personal performance, operational execution. I think one of the most powerful elements of the model in terms of process gets back to results accountability and these key performance activities that are part of that accountability model. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Again, just at a really high level, it's so easy to talk about accountability. And again, a lot of people will roll their eyes, but you need to think about it in a revolutionary way from a process standpoint. Accountability needs to be a continuous, ongoing exercise. You're like, well, how do I do that? This for us is a weekly event, right? And you think about any great sports team, they're doing their accountability after every game, maybe even after every practice. The point is that it's constantly under the microscope, and it has to be the same way here. It has to be an incredibly deeply embedded part of the process.
Well, and if it's aligned with our strategy and where we're headed, rather than just, again, like SOPs, just thing that has to happen to make sure everybody's doing what they should be doing, that when it becomes a part of a bigger process and a bigger effort, then it actually gets to the team strength, because we're talking about what we're doing, not to ensure that everybody's doing every little thing that is important. We got to do what we commit to, but in that we learn what doesn't work, what works and what doesn't work. And then we can spread that information around the organization or from team to team or individual to individual. And that drives that team strength.
Think of the power of this. I love what you're saying there, because think of the power of this. If you got to a point where everyone in your organization was doing a handful of key performance activities every week that took a bite out of those important but not urgent big objectives that your organization felt were the most important things that they could go after, you would get things done you have never gotten done before. You would perform at levels you have never performed at before. So this is unlocking the potential of your organization in a way that has never been unlocked.
And we talk about, I actually working with was working with somebody I've known for a long time. His name is Dan Krug, and he was talking about, I heard him talk about this week in working with the client, this interesting connection between how change is influenced by our history. And I think back to the beauty of KPAs is that it's hard to get change given the cultural history as an individual, as an organization, how we're operating. But those KPAs, these key performance activities, even if we take what we recommend for our clients, we take one a week to try to start having our brains think differently about how we approach our day or our week to move to those goals. We rewrite history. We write a new history in terms of how we're performing going forward. But that's the power of these KPAs, I think, to change from who we've been to where we're headed.
Yep.
All right, Brian, this is awesome. I love these conversations.
Super fun.
Yeah. Okay. So, Brian, thanks for joining us. And thank you to all our listeners for going on this journey with us. We'll continue the conversation next week on Chapter 4. And again, we're here to equip. We've got a website, we've got videos online, we've got a tool, we've got this book, and now we're creating this podcast to give as much information to leaders as possible on how to drive peak performance in their organizations. Of course, we're always here to help, but the more we can communicate about what it is that the power of this model and get the word out, the better. So we hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Please like and follow us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, we hope your drive toward peak performance is successful. Thank you.